If you were a kid growing up in the 80s, one thing was true. Video games were the spawn of Satan. Okay, we know that isn't true, but our parents? Adults were terrified of your Atari and your Nintendo, and filmmakers made all sorts of movies that painted games in a negative light. In Wargames, a nuclear war was damn near started. While there were plenty of films that understood the imagination and the creative spirit that video games could foster, such as Tron and The Last Starfighter, for example, there's also a film such as Cloak and Dagger, which goes to some really dark territory to teach a lesson to kids that, honestly, everyone could stand to learn. Cloak and Dagger starred Henry Thomas. You know, the E.T. kid, who grew up to become the Suicide King's dude.
No! No!
And the Midnight Mass guy. He plays 11-year-old Davey, a lonely kid who retreats from his troubled life into an espionage video game called Cloak and Dagger. His father, Hal, is a military man who is gone for long stretches, and his mom is tragically dead. So Davey is all alone most of the time. A true latchkey kid, his only real friend is his imaginary pal Jack Flack, an American spy who, like Davey's father, is played by the great comedian Dabney Coleman. The decision to have Coleman pull double duty on Cloak and Dagger was genius, for reasons that become clear later. The unkillable, unflappable Jack Flack manifests in the real world, which is convenient timing. Helping out a local video game dude, and look at this dude and what a stereotypical dork he resembles. Davey and his nosy neighbor friend Kim witness an FBI agent's murder. But before the guy dies, he hands them a Cloak and Dagger game with a secret microchip in it that others are willing to kill for. And kill they do, because people die all over the place in this grim adventure for kids. Starting with that poor video game dude, who was never given a chance to evolve past his stereotypical looks. But others die too, and that's sort of the point of Cloak and Dagger, because it's Jack, supposed hero, who drags Davey into being just as violent as he is. Cloak and Dagger has all the trappings of a fanciful spy movie for kids, but it's actually a lot smarter than that. Jack tries to get Davey to be just as violent as him, but Davey's a good kid. His gun is a water pistol and he uses a baseball as a grenade, for Pete's sake. But after Jack tricks him into killing one bad guy, it begins to dawn on the kid that, hey, this violent stuff kinda sucks. He begins to understand that all the make-believe violence of his video games is actually quite horrific in real life, and that part of being an adult is learning to find other solutions to problems. Crucial to Davey's understanding is who the real heroes are. Jack Flack is admittedly dashing and funny, and every kid's dream, but it's his father, a hard-working military guy who works hard to take care of his family, is what a true hero looks like. Aww, I know, right? It's pretty sweet. But let's be honest, there are some adults out there who could stand to learn these lessons even now. Still, this is a really clever script from writer Tom Holland, who JoBlo fans might recognize as the writer and director of other classics, Fright Night just a year later, and Child's Play in 1988. This guy made one hell of a mark on a lot of kids in the 80s, and I personally don't think he gets enough credit. Leave when they stop believing, Jack Flack always says, and it's genuinely sad to watch the imaginary agent fading away as he realizes Davey doesn't need him anymore. Holland doesn't save this crucial learning moment for the end of the movie. The mission is still on, and suddenly Davey is all alone to rescue Kim, keep the cartridge safe, and save the world, basically. Honestly, this is when the movie actually starts to feel like a movie for kids, as Davey uses more playful subterfuge. It's still deadly dangerous, but the tone is definitely less dark at this point. The film was directed by the late Richard Franklin, and I won't pretend he does anything particularly novel here. His direction was pretty basic, with Holland's screenplay doing most of the heavy lifting. But Franklin is another director who had his moment and made a mark with films such as FX2, Psycho 2, and the bizarre ape horror Link, which I recommend for just being weird. A devotee and scholar of Alfred Hitchcock, Franklin has appeared in multiple documentaries on the legendary director, and like him, steered his style towards psychological thrillers and tense character studies, of which Cloak and Dagger is both. Franklin does prove pretty good at capturing chase sequences though, and there's a good one with multiple facets to it later in the movie. Set in San Antonio, there's a tense chase set at the busy Riverwalk, where Davey eludes capture, hopping on and hopping off of boats, befriending a dubious elderly couple, while the bad guys are in hot pursuit and shooting to kill. I used to look at Henry Thomas as the Elijah Wood of his day. He seemed to be more mature than other child actors, and I'm unsure that anyone else could have handled such a complicated film as Cloak and Dagger. His Davey is really put through the ringer, and gets taught some harsh lessons with his life on the line. But the real star of the show is Dabney Coleman. Yes, he was in Wargames too, but the future Slap Maxwell was one of the most brilliant comedic actors around, and he had the chance to show what he could do as a James Bond level super spy. He had the tough task of playing the flashier version of a regular guy, which also meant having two very different kinds of interactions with Henry Thomas. The two are wonderful together, and it's interesting to watch their chemistry remain intact as Davey pulls away from Jack Flack and begins to listen more to the teachings of his father. As for the video game at the heart of this deadly spy plot, well, it's a real thing. However, the Cloak and Dagger video game was only in the arcades at the time, so they basically faked it so it looked as if Davey was playing it at home. A console version was eventually released in 2022, nearly 40 years later in the Atari 50 compilation, which is pretty cool. Cloak and Dagger was released in 1984 during the Summer Olympics, with Universal figuring that kids would skip the games and go to the movies instead. That plan didn't really work out, as the film only made $9.7 million at the box office. It became a much bigger hit later on VHS and on cable television, although it's a tough one to find now. I recently hosted a special screening of the film at Alamo Drafthouse here in DC, trying to introduce it to a new generation of fans. You should check it out too. Cloak and Dagger is a really special coming-of-age movie that combines childish wish fulfillment, deadly action, pathos, and emotional growth into a nifty spy movie. It's still shocking to me that there hasn't been a remake yet, but that makes seeing the original even more meaningful.